Well, I'm very, very pleased to be in this marvellous location as well. My father was a member of the Royal Society of Chemistry. My mother, as we shouldn't forget about women in science, I should say, was a pharmacist. When choosing my degree options, I don't remember checking out how marvellous the professional bodies facilities are, but clearly chemists made a good choice if they went down that route. But there's I suppose the two things that I'm going to try and put together today are in some ways they are working hand in hand, but in other ways they're a bit of a juxtaposition, because the grand challenges, I suppose, are just another way of thinking about things that we have been looking at and trying to address for some considerable time. And in fact, if you look at the government website on clean growth, it tells you very little on the grand challenges section, and it's mainly about buildings. And whilst food and drink manufacturers have factories, the building side of things is not something that we have particularly focused on. So what I intend to do is talk a little bit about our Ambition 2025, which is something that we have we've been working on it for a couple of years, but prior to that, we had our FDF five-fold ambition, which Jim will remember very well, because in his era as president, we had the five-fold ambition, and we came to a you never come to the end on these things, but we met our ambition. So we said, well, we're going to have to have a new ambition that stretches us further and maybe looks at some areas that we didn't look at previously. So that's the initial bit that I'm going to take us through. So I've got mainly slides with logos or pictures and those sorts of things on. So I just have to remember the right words to apply to them. But in this case, you have the vision and the ambition. And it very clearly states that we want to be a sector that is working to the benefit of the society and the environment. And that the ambition is around safe, nutritious, affordable and sustainable food. So that sustainability piece has been there for right from the start of our ambitions. And indeed, as others have reflected, various elements of the ambition, it would be fair to say that a couple of years ago, in terms of our members, it felt a little bit like we were having to do a lot of encouragement for Food and Drink Federation members to engage on this topic. But just at the moment, there is nothing really that is a hotter topic, and there are many things, of course, that are driving that. I wouldn't say actually the grand challenges are a driver of that, but essentially this is something that is really top of mind for our sector at this time. Ambition 2025 has a number of strands to it, and if you look at the top 5 of those logos, these were part of our FDF five-fold ambition. There's 5 of them. There's a clue in the title. And they are the big hitting items that you would really expect for any sustainability challenge to have. So climate change, food waste, packaging, water and transport. And I'm sure all of these you can see could fit into a clean growth agenda, because whether it's around climate change and carbon, which is really the crux of clean growth, or whether it's the avoidance of food waste, which is clearly a waste stream that if you're trying to grow in a way that has minimal impact, you want to avoid, or whether it's around transport miles, some of the things that Ian was talking right at the start. These are all incredibly important elements of sustainability. But when we came to our Ambition 2025, we wanted really to start thinking more, to challenge ourselves more and go in areas that we hadn't really gone before. Sounds terribly, going into the ether. But sustainable supply chains was something that we were very interested in, because as food manufacturers, I mean, a lot of people talk about pre-farm gate and post-farm gate, and I guess that Jim was talking more on the agricultural side and then through to food products. We are very conscious of the fact that we are almost the final bit in the putting things together stage. Retailers are obviously the last bit as it gets to consumers, but we are handing on finished products to retailers. And behind is these incredibly long and complex supply chains. And you'll hear people talk about embedded water, embedded carbon, and all these types of things. And we, in the decisions we make in choices of ingredients, raw materials, how we go about putting foods together, it's this whole supply chain which we are the culmination of, really. So we wanted to much more look at how choices that we make on ingredients and components, how that can impact our final product and the impact it has on the environment. And also associated with that is this whole notion of natural capital. Now, it's fair to say a couple of years ago when we talked to people about natural capital, they would kind of do a bit of a rolling of the eyes and, oh my goodness, this all sounds very weird and wonderful. But I think especially in the era now where we're talking about the oceans and the impact that we can have on the wider environment through what may seem fairly basic decisions that we can make as manufacturers or as individuals in society, then that whole how we care for the planet and beyond is a very important one, and that's really what natural capital is all about. Just to give you a feel for how we are delivering against our ambitions, these are some figures from last year. So every year we do a review of how we're doing against our ambitions. And I actually did a podcast last week at some studios up in Euston, and there were people on the podcast. It was called Planet Pod, which will be out next week or something, and they, I think, had an image of food manufacture in their head. And you know, we always talk about evidence-based. We always talk about using the data. And I quoted this figure here to them, that less than 0.1% of food and packaging waste is sent to landfill. And I could have picked them off the floor, because this is not an image that people have of food and drink manufacture. There is a perception that it's very, very wasteful. Now, it doesn't all end up as perfect finished product. Some of it ends up as animal feed and various other things. There's this hierarchy that you want as much as possible, obviously, to go to human consumption. And for the other things, some are better than others, and the least thing, the worst thing, if you like, is something to go to landfill. But that we can achieve in our sector a figure such as that, which is essentially zero on landfill, I think is very powerful. And it shows you of the work that has been going on for many years in this area, and that we're certainly not working from scratch. And when you look at clean growth, a 51% reduction over the time period that we've been making these measurements again shows that big progress is being made. Now that doesn't mean that you can just say, well, we've done enough and we'll maintain that, because of course you won't keep the progress up. But there is good knowledge and good understanding, and I think one of the biggest areas is how a bit like was being talked about earlier about the graph, is how do you bring everyone up to be part of that best performing? If you can just shift the graph towards the right and have those that are performing less well being the best performers, then you can really move the dial on some of these things. But all of these, I think you'd probably agree, are pretty impressive numbers, and they are things that we need to keep focusing on, we need to keep investing in. And I guess that's one of the key messages, and people say, well, why can't you do more? Well, often these things you do need to invest to get the payback, and sometimes food and drink manufacturers, 95% of the sector is in small and medium sized companies. I think when people think about our sector, they tend to think about the big multinationals. Well, yes, they are quite a lot of the tonnage and the value, but in terms of businesses, 95% of food and drink manufacturers in the UK are small and medium sized businesses. So them getting that knowledge and being able to invest to improve is definitely a challenge. In terms of the shaping sustainable value chains, there's a lot of different elements to this, I think. One of the things that we've worked on and released this year is a resources hub, which tells you, which is accessible to the public, and it's all about some of that trying to pass on really good tips on how to do things, some tools and best practice techniques, and that's something that, as I say, is available to everyone. Sits on our website. We also have been involved in producing documents again, which are freely available, and you can see one here around sustainable palm oil. So, that's obviously quite a controversial ingredient, but even ingredients where there are some acknowledged issues, there is still best practice which can be used. And then there's other activities which are not FDF activities, but which we and our members are actively involved in. And those would be aspects such as the court-old commitment, the relatively recently launched UK Plastic Pact. And we've been a long-term collaborator with RAP, which was partly a government organisation, now is more standalone, but has a big emphasis on waste and resources use. So to bring it towards the clean growth strategy, I guess there are quite a lot of government initiatives around our sector, and sometimes it's quite difficult to cut through all of this and try, and a bit like with that Venn diagram of that was shown earlier about health, there's probably some stuff in the clean growth strategy which overlaps with industrial strategy and the 25-year environmental plan as well. Each of them has its own particular role and purpose, but there are some elements that are in common. And I think the grand challenges is certainly the idea is there to have some themes which help drive activities in each of those policy areas. You've heard quite a lot about the sector deal from Ian and how the industrial strategy relates to the food and drink sector. Obviously, it's not just the food and drink sector and farming sectors that are involved in industrial strategy. This is across many sectors, and in fact, many of them already have sector deals. So that we're working on it now and obviously hoping for success. We're kind of a bit later to this than some other sectors have been. And there's the grand challenges with the 4 challenges that we're talking about today, and there's also the industrial strategy challenge funds as well, which is something that is being run through Innovate UK, and well, it's quite a complex area. I used to work at Innovate UK, as was mentioned, and I've said, my goodness, this isn't quite as transparent as one might like it to be. But essentially, there are large sums of government money which are being put towards various bids, and in fact, you could say, I mean, this is definitely an overlap with the environment plan. I was at a launch just a couple of weeks ago at the House of Commons for NERC, which is the Natural Environment Research Council, and their vision for zero plastic waste, which is getting quite a lot of impetus behind it. And that's one of the Wave 3 submissions under the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. And that feels like it's got a lot of legs to it. There is also another one that the Knowledge Transfer Network, supported by Mosely, who are also supporting this zero plastic vision. That's part of the Wave 3 submissions as well. And there are a number of these submissions in, and we will see which ones of them get a chunk of the £100 million. But they are, there is substantial money there if you know how to get it. Plastics is the topic of the moment. Arguably, it feels like the point where a lot of things have come together, captured the imagination of society, and business is obviously having to respond. And as part of the announcement potentially that there would be a plastic tax, Treasury have also said, well, we might put a tax on it. They've sent that out to consultation, and 130,000 people have responded to it. So that's going to be quite a lot of reading for them to get through that. But there is another £20 million in research and innovation funding around innovation on plastics there as well. So there's a number of these things which, whilst not being tagged clean growth, are clearly something that can support clean growth. These really are clean growth areas, though, and these are opportunities and focus areas that have existed for some time, and this is from October of last year. And one of my colleagues is, in fact, he was just walking down to Bays this morning, I think, to talk about this topic. So this is a very hot topic, and it is one that government is very engaged in. They are the topics that you would expect for a clean growth agenda, I guess, around low carbon, smart energy, embedded generation, energy storage. If you think about our factories, we tend to do a lot of cooking. Sounds basic, but that's basic. That is one of the basic things that we have to do. We turn raw materials which are not very digestible or don't taste very good raw. We cook them up and make them into something that people really want. Chewing on raw wheat would not really be enjoyable or nutritionally beneficial for anyone. But obviously, if we're heating, that means that we're using energy to do that. And because of the number of manufacturers there are, that all adds up, and then that's quite a high energy sector that you become. So these are really important things for us to look at, and they will be the sorts of ways that we will continue to make progress against those carbon figures and demonstrate that we are growing cleanly. And this is my final slide, which hopefully illustrates that we are we are a manufacturing sector that has been taking notice of what needs to be done around clean growth already. So this is gross value added on the blue line from, 1991 through to 2016. And okay, so there's been a few bumps in it, but essentially the gross value added total has increased by 62% to about 27 billion in 2016. But so we're in growth, so that's really good. So growing is about growing, but are we doing it in a clean way? And that's the yellow line is the CO2 index. So that's the CO2 emissions from energy use by the amount that we're growing. So we're growing, but we're doing it in a cleaner way year on year. But as the best investors say, past performance is not a predictor of future success. So these are things that we need to keep focus on. I'm sure that's why government is saying that clean growth is an important strategy. They know about the climate change commitments and all these sorts of things. So I'm sure that's why this particular challenge is important that we continue to focus on it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Helen. Just one or two very quick questions. Anybody has them? Yep, Sean.
Thank you. You presented some pretty impressive sort of emission, water and waste reduction percentages. Do you know if there's much work being done looking at how much the clean growth strategy is likely to reduce that even further? Are there expected figures?
I don't know the answer to that question. One of my colleagues might. I think, we're very clear about what our Ambition 2025 says that we should be continuing to do. And I think that benchmarks well against the overall numbers, but whether it's identical or whether it's slightly above or whether it's slightly behind, I couldn't tell you. But in discussions that we have with BEIS, they know the trajectory that we're on, they know how we're hoping to achieve that. And I guess that's a dialogue that we will continue to have with them.